Looking at opinion polls and a lot of things around that particular issue, I have here with me regular Leonard Ebute. Thanks for coming back. Looking very regal today. And of course, Olumide Makanjuola, Executive Director, TIERS, the Initiative for Equal Rights. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here today. Now, opinion polls, it's still sort of a new thing in this part, and we're still trying to understand why they are important and if they should be a measure of a lot of things. But in other parts of the world, they've gotten a lot of bashing in the last, at least within the last year, from Brexit to the United States election to even a bit of the French election. A lot of polls have just been thrown, head down. What are your opinions on that? What are your opinions on opinion polls?
Well, so first of all, opinion polls are statistical, samples, quick snapshots of situations, right? And when it has to do with social issues especially, there are, because it's based on perception, you statistically, you make allowances for perception bias. Especially on social issues, people hold public views that are significantly different from their private views. And it is the private views that informs things like elections, because it's so closed ballot, you get in there. And so Trump, for instance, isn't a guy you want to like openly. But again, if you are secretly protesting against the system, back in your ballot box, you could do the switch. So yes, they are a fair representation of reality sometimes, if the sample size is enough. Okay, again, that is also another limitation of opinion polls. You want to generalize based on a very tiny proportion of the population. When you are doing random sampling, again, there's the problem about how random is random, especially when you are unable to control some of the variables. So it has inherent flaws. I think the analysts accept those flaws, but then in the absence of better ways of trying to gauge public opinion, it could at least be a trigger for further research. Yeah.
In places like Nigeria now, I believe that in other parts of the world, it's probably because there's a long history of conducting polls on any and everything. I mean, a poll is done on everything in places like the United States. In this part, it's sort of a new thing. So how is this data gathered? How do we make phone calls? Do we randomly find people on the streets? How do you think this is done in Nigeria?
I think it depends on the company you're using. Some people do phone call. I mean, the one I'm very much familiar about is the phone call, random phone call. You have to decide what is your demographic. Okay. What are you looking at? What age bracket, what, career bracket, what educational, qualification. So that's pretty much quite easy to do than going on the street and then ask a question. It kind of also depends on your number of questions, that determine, how you want to do it. But I think the only most known polling company, also, how many polling companies do you have in Nigeria? Yeah. So the only known, most popular one is NOI. Yeah. And what they do most time is, random phone calls, sampling. How they get their number, I usually don't know. But they do have a database of phone numbers that they use.
I think NOI polls is what they're called. They've been around for about a couple of years now, and about 5 or 6 years, and they tried to do some work, especially with the last election in Nigeria, 2015. It wasn't too disastrous, knowing that it was still. It kind of turned out the way they said things were going to turn out eventually. But I want to look at some specifics now, and there's a poll that actually caught my attention, which I thought was very interesting. They did a poll on whistleblowing. Right? And they found that 92%, not shocking, I thought it would be higher, 92% of Nigerian citizens are willing to blow the whistle if they suspect corrupt practices. I probably would have thought 98, 99%, but does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Again, you would have to cross the barrier of the statistical inherent problems with polling. For example, I looked at the methodology for the data collection on this particular poll, for instance. They sampled a random phone call of 1,000 people around the 6 geopolitical zones. Now, in a country of about 100 million adults, you would put 5 zeros behind the decimal place. If you put 1,000 over that figure. So it's like 0.00001% of the population. So statistically speaking, you are saying, is this data adequate for this level of generalization? The answer is no. This is not what you use to make a decision. This is what you use to trigger further research. To say, okay, a snapshot shows this. what would an in-depth research shows? Like you said, your off-the-street perception is 98%. This is saying 92%. Maybe we would be surprised with the spate of whistleblowing that has affected families and all of that. Maybe there may be a perception against it that we cannot see with the data that we currently have. So this is really useful for triggering further research.
For people who don't really understand how opinion polls work, explain how the margin of error works now. Because people always say, okay, if it's 92% plus or minus, there's always a number behind that. What is that figure about?
So what it means is, it means 9 out of 10 people said, 9.2 people, there's no 9.2 people. So, so it means 9 out of 10 people say yes, they will blow the whistle if they sense that corruption is in the air. Out of the 1,000 people they sampled, it means 920 favored blowing of whistle and 80 said no for whatever reason. The reasons for which they said no were there, and all of could be abuses, could be all of those things. They're there, but. So this is it. This is the problem with opinion polls. It's perception based, and perceptions are situational. So what you believe today, you can change tomorrow. An incident happens now. They call Ebuka a thief. Then Ebuka is in the air, and we all know that Ebuka is not a thief. Then we start wondering, what's this whole whistleblowing thing? We change perception immediately. So it cannot be the only basis for policy decision making, but it gives a snapshot to trigger further research.
I'll come back to you now, because I know a lot of people have argued about the scientific nature of opinion polls, and you keep saying it's just perception based. And I want to tackle you on that. But I want to come to you now on another opinion poll, which also caught my attention, on social perception on sexual minority rights in Nigeria. And it shows that there's a rise in family acceptance from 11% in 2015 to 13%. That's quite that's quite an interesting rise, to 13% in 2017. Findings also show that 39% of Nigerians now say that sexual minorities should be allowed to have access to public services. That's a 9% increase from 2015. You work with tiers now. Does that reflect what you see on ground?
Yes, it does and it does not. And I think that, from your own time, in 2015 and 2017, the fact that we're even talking about access to public health, housing, education, we're trying to debate this thing, is a bit quite disturbing for me. I mean, not to ignore the 9% that came between 2015 and 2017, but you're seeing those things, but what you don't see is, like I said, opinion poll, the problem is that these are things that change, every now and then. So you could see 39% this year. But how sure are you that you have this 39% for a very long time? People's opinion on sexual minority keep changing, based on what they see, what they hear, or what they feel. So 39 is good enough, but it's also not good. Because access to public health should be something we should not even be debating. I mean, we should not even have a conversation around it at all. Whatever anybody thinks about anybody, it should be something you have access to publicly. You should be able to rent a house, you should be able to, go to the clinic, you should be able to do whatever, get education, and all of those things. But these are the reality, that we're seeing at the moment, and it's changing. But that change is just very slow compared to what we want to see.
But we live in a country where there's a law now against a lot of sexual rights, the rights of the sexual rights of people. That's what I was trying to say. But we are seeing these polls now saying that there's this gradual shift, even if it's slow. Do you think we're far away from, because I know even Mr. President Jonathan at the time, after he left office, did say,
wanted to revisit it.
Yeah, he wanted to revisit that particular issue and all of that. Do you think we're going to get to a point where maybe we might look at that bill again, or that law actually, and say, you know what, maybe we should take a step back? Are we ever going to get there?
I think we're going to get a point where we'll not only review that law, but review every other law that is quite discriminatory. Because, those are not the only law we have. We have the Criminal Penal Code, we have Sharia law, we have many other laws that create barrier, for access to public health. And these are the things that we need to review. So, and I keep saying to people, that particular law signed by Mr. Jonathan is not the only law that we need to revisit. I think every law that creates any barrier to access to public health, acceptance, family care law, we need to revisit it generally. And I think we'll get there, when we're able to fix our human rights system.